The time for this debate has expired. I call on private and local orders of the day number 1.
Papawai and Kaikokirikiri Trust's Amendment Bill, second reading.
Alistair Scott.
Mr Speaker, I move that the Papawai and Kaikokirikiri Trust's Amendment Bill be now read a second time. I'd like to acknowledge the hard work of the Papawai and Kaikokirikiri Board at getting this bill to the House. Mr Speaker, this bill was brought to the House to amend the Papawai and Kaikokirikiri Trusts Act of 1943 so that the Board can better manage its functions. The trusts have a long history in the Wairarapa, going back nearly 170 years, when 2 blocks of land were donated to establish a school in the Wairarapa. It involved the Lord Bishop of New Zealand as part of that act, and since that donation the trusts have managed a Maori boarding school from 1860 to 65, then the Papawai Native School, which was opened in the 30s, and then a further piece of land was added to the estate, which was purchased for Hukarangi School, which operated for a few years, from 1930 to 32, which was then destroyed by fire. So that's a little bit of the history of the trust, sir. But the Act came into enforcement in 1943, the Act that we're talking about today, to extend the powers of the trust so they could better manage and have the practical use of the funds to advance specifically the education of the tangata whenua of Wairarapa. Now, the Act is extremely archaic, it's out of date, it's quite patronising in its terminology and what it was doing. So, for example, the Act required the Trust to donate 2/3 of its income so 2/3 had to go to post-primary education fund for scholarships for Ngāti Kahanunu first, then children of Māori descent on the East Coast, and then finally for Māori descendants anywhere in New Zealand, but controlled by the Anglican Church. So that's 2/3 had to go to schools specifically around the Anglican Church. The remaining third was to be paid out for the use of any post-primary school scholarship for books, clothing, equipment, assisting parents and even residential costs. But it was specified. So this bill changes all that. This bill gives greater flexibility to the distribution of the funds by allowing the scholarships for post-primary education of children who have whakapapa in relation to the tangata whenua of Wairarapa. So not iwi specific. For a wide range of uses, not specific uses, but relating to education and educational support, and the requirements for scholarships to go to schools, as I say, conducted by the Anglican Church, is outdated and archaic. The current Act, this is to do with the governance changes proposed in the bill, sir. The current Act requires 10 members of the board, one of which must be representative of the Ministry of Ed, one from the Maori Land Corp is appointed, and 4 Maori descendants. So very, very prescriptive. The bill will establish a far more robust nomination process for board members. There will be 8 board members, consisting 4 members appointed by the Bishop, and also others appointed or elected by tangata whenua of Wairarapa, in accordance with the process adopted by themselves, publicly notified as you would expect. So this change will empower tangata whenua of Wairarapa by giving them the authority to decide who they would like to see manage their trust funds and to decide on an appointment process that meets their needs. So none of this patronising dictatorial specification that is currently in the Act. The Act also requires the powers of the board the Act also restricted the powers of the board by requiring all leasing of land to be in accordance with the Public Bodies Leases Act. So the board may only sell the lands with the consent of the Ministry of Education, but the Minister may not consent to the sale of the land that had been acquired from any Maori tribe unless the Maori Land Corp had been involved and had given consent. So again, very specific, very archaic, without giving any trust or any delegation to the people that are running the show. The requirement is unnecessarily complicated and needs updating. The bill will warrant the selling of the Clearville land if the board wishes, but not the Papawai land or the Kaikokirikiri land, without going through this process that I outlined. Mr Speaker, I would like to acknowledge the board would also be able to lease the 3 pieces of land that are available to them as they see fit. So again, giving the trustees a lot more scope in conducting the affairs as they should. Mr Speaker, I'd like to thank the Maori Affairs Select Committee across the House for reviewing the bill and suggesting some changes. They've suggested the bill be enacted in Te Reo Maori as well as English. Clause 5 will be amended to be consistent with the New Zealand Bill of Rights Act, and that was quite interesting because the original act said that a trustee had to be of sound mind now, and mental stability or some such word. So that actually breaches the Bill of Rights, and so that wording has been changed. And of course, if those words were still there, half of us wouldn't be able to be trustees of that board. But anyway. A new 4A there's a new clause 4A to specify the term of office of board members, and there have been some minor amendments to replace the references to 2015 to 2017 to ensure the bill passes before that date. The bill will modernise the current Act to establish a more robust nomination process of trustees, remove the unnecessary restrictions on the distribution of funds and the use of the Clearville land, and allow for a much more flexible distribution of funds by the board as they see fit. The bill can only be achieved through legislation, which is why we're here today, sir, and I commend this bill to the House.
Mika Fyfe.